All right, recording is on. So we are here today to talk about kind of buyouts and effort being charged to sponsored projects and how those two things work together. Because it's not always super clear. The principle coming from the federal government is that we need to be charging, like our actual time, the amount of effort that we actually put in on the grant is what should be, charged to the grant or to cost sharing in other ways. But then we also have this concept of a buyout. And I think faculty tend to think in chunks of like buyouts. I want one course buyout for the academic year and one summer month budgeted into this grant, which is, okay, but we have to do some, thinking about that and making sure that, that there's a Venn diagram meeting here, I think, with the amount of effort that's actually happening on the grant and, how we want to structure that within within buyouts and within our normal work. So I have invited Heidi Huff here to give a little to cover a little bit about how she thinks about effort from a research compliance place. Heidi is our assistant director of the financial services office and has a really strong history in research compliance. And then Stacy Horn from Family Social Science will we'll talk a little bit about how she thinks about buyouts as a chair. So Heidi, at this point, I will turn it over to you.
So I might ramble a little bit because I'm not entirely sure where people's comfort levels or interest levels in this are. I have some notes off to the side, so I'll be looking off to check myself a little bit. The first thing I'll say is payroll and effort are actually not the same thing. They look the same most of the time, often, but they are technically very different things. One is based on your actual payroll, and one is based on the concept of the whole. And the whole meaning the whole of the work that you're doing at the university is your 100%. Whether you're looking at your day or your pay period or your effort period or your budget year, it's always based on the idea that the work you do at the university that's considered standard institutional based salary inclusive is always 100%. And so the more complicated your tasks are, or, things you're involved in that might increase your pay for short periods of time or long periods of time or put you at different pay rates, the more likely you are to have a skewing happen. People who have 9 or 10 over 12 appointments, that skewing happens. And it doesn't mean you're not doing what you in your mind should be doing, but it does mean the percentages start to alter because it's again not based on your paycheck dollar amount. It's that whole. And it's sometimes hard to wrap your head around it. Even as accountants, we sometimes struggle with wrapping our head around it. We have a lot of tools to help us. Occasionally, we have faculty and staff who work on grants that are subject to salary caps. It may be NIH, it may be from a foundation that has their own salary cap restrictions. Those also play a part in potentially skewing effort. When you're working with the pre-award team, you're not really thinking about it that way, and they aren't either. So one of our jobs is to help interpret what happened and help guide you through the process of, does this still align with what the sponsor believes you're committing as paid or cost shared effort? Is it in line with any variances that might be allowed with the sponsor? Is it reasonable? And do we need to maybe, just send an email to the grant officer or equivalent to qualify what's going on and make sure that they're in agreement that it's reasonable? These are the things your finance professional can help you with. And sometimes it takes us a little while, depending on how complicated your portfolio is. But we have ways to get there, and we can help. I think when it comes to, and I might be going off the rails a little bit because just how my notes are, but when it comes to talking about that in relation to course buyouts, I think it's ever so much more important to understand how that's translating. And I think that even though your finance professional is not pre-award, if you know you have a complicated portfolio and you want to make some commitments that you want to feel like you're really able to fulfill, it might be a good idea to check in with them. We have ways to plan these in advance, and we can help make this easier for your pre-award folks to put through their proposals.
Yeah, on the pre-award side, we play with imaginary numbers, and then they
Yeah.
become real when we turn them over to Heidi and her team.
The only other thing I'll say is I know sometimes, and I'm seeing this, so I'm just throwing this out here. There are course releases and there are course buyouts, and they're not the same thing, although some people use the term interchangeably, and in fact, one of the units does. And I just want to point out that can be a little confusing at times. So if you're not really sure which one you have, don't be afraid to ask, because there is a big difference. One is based on effort that you're committing to grants, and one is based on, maybe you're a new employee and they're like, we're going to make your first year easier and we're just going to eat this class, and you don't have to teach it or worry about it at all. So I think from my notes were longer, but they were a little convoluted because I wrote them last night. So I think I got the meat of it. Oh, I will say one other thing. Summer effort is never applied towards a course buyout. That is an entirely different appointment. There are generally, not always, but there's generally no teaching involved. And so, keep that in mind if you're planning effort.
See, Heidi, could you say a little bit about what happens like in post-award? If, say, I've budgeted, 20% effort during the academic year, but now I want to change it to summer.
Yes. Okay. So for most sponsors, and this is where, again, you'll want to talk to your finance professional. They're your financial grants manager. Most of the time, as long as you're working on the grant during the time period that you're including, and you're not, so if you're working on it in the summer and you want to take that effort in the summer instead of the academic year, and you can say, you know what, I did spend this much of my time working on it. This is real. I spent at least this much. I might have worked during the academic year too on it, and that's fine, but I'm not claiming pay for that portion. That's almost always okay, but you're not going to get a course buyout, and you may not be able to fulfill the effort depending on what you committed you may still need to do something during the academic year. And it might be talking to your department and asking if you can cost share part of it, because maybe you found the funding didn't work, especially with the grad RA pay changes. For some smaller grants, that might be, super impactful. And that would be whether it's academic or summer. But especially summer, you may find sometimes that the effort you committed for the budget year, you can't fulfill it in the summer. There's just not enough. You can't exceed your regular rate of pay. So you may have to have some conversations, and that might be with the department. That might be by taking some paid effort during the academic year and actually represent it a little more evenly, or that might be talking to your sponsor, and we'd need that in writing, if there's a sponsor approved reduction of effort. And we can help you facilitate the request going through SPOC, because a lot of times they want the formal path. So the other thing I'd say about changing effort is you do want to be careful that if you're taking the summer to get to know yourself, we're not going to police that you ask for summer effort, but no, that's a high risk. They do audit. And sometimes they choose to interview PIs. And I'll tell you how many times PIs get nice and comfortable and start saying way more than they're ever asked.
Like you had a week-long vacation or a 2-week-long vacation, yet you were charging 100% effort during the
Yes,
summer.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is if you are consistently working, you know, and this is based on what Ellen just said, for non-faculty, if you take a week vacation, you don't need to adjust effort for it because that's part of your regular appointment. Like if you're a PNA researcher or whatever, and you have a 12-month appointment, your right to a vacation or a sick day is part of your regular 2,080 hours if you're one FTE. For faculty, I believe that they do not get vacation time carved out, so that we would have to adjust for, and that's a true thing.
Yeah. And that's something that, your finance professional or your grant coordinator would be bringing up when they're looking at your effort going
Mhm.
forward, saying, you have 100% effort this summer. Are you really going to be here every single day?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. All right. So we'll have time for questions and discussion, but I want to switch things over to Stacy right now for her department chair perspective on, you know, how she looks at effort and how that translates into buyouts. And I just want to be clear here that buyouts are entirely at the department's discretion. They set the rates, they set the parameters at the core of it, it's a deal between you and your department chair. So,
Um, yeah, so okay, I'll start with like principles and values and then we can talk about logistics. So in FSOS, our sort of principle or value is to um try to, cover our costs, obviously, of replacement instruction, but keep as much money in the grant as possible in relation to a buyout. So we only charge 10% of salary for buyouts, which I think is probably the lowest in the college. Um, so, and the idea is, again, we want to replace we want to cover our replace. So we're not looking to make a ton of money off of buyouts necessarily, with the caveat that some people's salary doesn't, 10% of their salary doesn't actually cover what we need to pay somebody to teach a class, right? So because we charge everybody 10%, then that, and some people make, we could replace three, instructors, adjuncts based on what their 10% is. That gets us a pool of money that we can then use to sort of cover that replacement teaching cost. And potentially also do some other things related to kind of research incentives or, like Heidi said, have some money for cost sharing if things go awry, all of those kinds of things, right? So in our department, the buyout money comes just to the department. We don't currently have a salary savings program, in part because we people get ICR back through the regular mechanisms, and in part because again, it's not a one-to-one that a 10% is going to cover the replacement costs for teaching. In terms of effort more broadly, this conversation is making me realize that I need to pay more attention pre-award what people are putting in, because our the rule in the college is you can only buy out 2 classes a year, right? So we have a 2-2 load, so you have to teach. Is that not a rule? Is that our rule?
that's your role. Yeah.
Oh, so our rule is you can only buy out 2 a year unless you ask for, like me for permission as head. And so that's only, if you're only buying out 2 classes, that's only 20% effort on your grant. Most people then use other money for summer salary, so it usually works out well, in terms of how people are able to spread their effort over the 12 months. Um, but in certain situations, for example, if the grant doesn't line up, like you didn't get it when thought you were going to get it, and you can't spend the money, right? So then we have to sort of adjust and make um, make other arrangements, if you will. So it's really messy, I would say. Um, and I think the thing I would communicate to investigators is that I think there's a perception that it's sort of clean and you get a buyout and that's just going to happen, and then you're going to get, like in our, we have some people thinking, well, why am I not getting any of that money back? Well, because it's paying for your replacement costs. Um, we don't charge, so far, we haven't charged people effort that's not related to buyouts and or summer salary. If that became the case, so like they put in too much effort in terms of, they can't buy out, if you will, right? So let's say they put in 40% effort, right? There's no way they're going to be able to spend that through summer salary and buyouts in our department. Um, then we would have to start charging the grant effort, which doesn't feel good because you're basically replacing salary you're already getting. And the perception is that the benefit's coming to the department, which it is. I mean, we're getting that replacement salary. So in those cases, we would maybe think about a salary savings kind of situation where the investigator would get some of that money back. I think what Ellen said that's really important is this is very local. So don't assume that anything I said is true in your your department. You really need to talk to your chair and your finance people to understand what the rules are in your department. So I know, for example, I don't know any of you on this call, so I apologize for that. In the Institute for Child Development, they cannot buy out classes. Because they already have, I don't want to say reduced teaching load, but they just can't afford to have their people buying out classes. So they have a whole other kind of system for managing effort. Um, I don't know, Ellen, what else can I say? What else were you thinking I would say? I mean, I think for me, the principles are we want to incentivize research as much as we can. We want people to be writing these grants so that they can do the great work that they want to do. We don't want to get in the way of that, and we don't necessarily want to like make a bank on it. But the department budget is very complex. And so as an investigator, you're part of this larger system that functions related to, where the revenue streams are, whether it's ICR, buyout money, appropriation, etc. And so just being open and curious about how that's all working is really important, I think. And trying to have those honest conversations with your folks. At the end of the day, we have to keep the lights on. We have to keep people employed. And part of how we do that is through our research portfolio.
I would say too, and just I want to interject, I wouldn't want anyone to ever think, you know, don't just, claim like 10% effort because that's the amount. You want to be
Right.
realistic, you want to get the awards, and you want to make sure the sponsor understands you're invested. And different sponsors are going to have different rating criteria. And this gets past me. I have some pre-award history, but I'm talking a little bit maybe above myself. But I just want to encourage anyone that's listening that you should be really thinking about your research first and the buyout second,
Yeah.
as far as how you're committing in your proposals. But know that you can't just throw a number at the wall and there with no repercussions. So if you're trying to get the grant and you're saying, I'm going to put 50% effort in this, and then you backtrack, you've got a sponsor at a certain level that could say, no, you committed this, and we're not okaying a reduction in effort over 25% or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I just lost my thought. But yeah, I mean, if you're, a junior investigator applying for, an R01 or a large grant, and you say, I'm only going to have 10% effort on this because that's what my buyout level is, the sponsor isn't going to look at that favorably. They want to see that you understand how much work it's going to take and are going to be committing the appropriate amount of effort.
And uniform guidance actually has some language about that. So you really, while there might be casual conversations that are talking about that, you really don't want to be planning your work in writing where you're talking about buyout, 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 driving everything you're doing, because that is against the the intent, at least in federal grants, and we tend to follow at the university the federal terms and conditions unless the sponsor specifically states something else.
Mhm. Yeah, and then just I think from a department head or chair standpoint in relation to that, um, it is good to sort of have an initial conversation either with the department administrator or the department chair about how much effort will be assigned to various grants and also how many grants you have potentially out there. I think that's where people get in trouble too, because they've committed effort on multiple things they're putting out in the world. And then if you're lucky enough to get them, you don't have enough time to have all that effort, right? So it's just really good to be in conversation with your people who do the finances on the department side, and the chair, right? So like in our department, yeah. So that if you're putting in, let's say you're putting in 35% effort on a grant, then we can talk about how to make that work financially for you and for the department and for the funding agency, right? Um, yeah, I think the thing that gets a little messy for me and that would be interesting to kind of get everybody's opinion on this is that, if you're a tenure line faculty member, 40% of your effort is already committed to research, right? So effort you're putting on a grant is on top of that 40%, right?
Yes, and that is, effort and time that the department and the college are paying your time for already.
Correct.
So the buyout is really just kind of an incentive. So I want to just ask both of you about one additional thing, and then we'll open it up, for more questions. But so kind of inherent in what we've been talking about is the idea that if you have effort during the academic year, a faculty member is not getting paid anything extra for that effort. That is going to the department and it displaces, whatever the funding was before the grant. And that's part of what Heidi talked about earlier, the institutional based salary. And we're figuring that that is 100% of the work that you're doing, whether you are doing the bare minimum for your job or whether you're doing a lot extra. That's the 100% is 100%, no matter, kind of what it is. And there's not a lot of ways around that, except for kind of summer salary. Oftentimes we have questions about, can I get paid extra for doing this grant or, paid extra for doing this course? And how do you guys think about that?
I'll throw my UG stuff out first.
Okay.
Uniform guidance expressly forbids you to be paid extra to work on a grant. It is not allowed at all. And anytime somebody is paid an overload here at the university, we have to go back to HR and try to get them to change it so that it rolls into your institutional based salary. It's just something you need to keep in mind. We're a research institution. If you want to pursue grants, that's part of your whole. It is never considered extra. Now, Stacy might say something different about, let's say you decide to teach an extra class, and that's totally separate issue. If that's something a unit allows or encourages, then what's going on with your regular pay? So,
Yeah, it's a good point, both of you. So in our department, if you're teaching an extra class above and beyond load with no buyouts, because we have a shortage and you have the expertise, we would do overload pay. If you're buying out a class and then you're saying, well, I need to teach this class, so I want overload pay, no, we don't do that. And I don't think anybody should be
no,
doing that.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So I think that, I think that's also a misunderstanding, particularly new folks coming into to the institution is that, you know, grants are not a way to supplement your 100% salary. Grant money is there to pay you for your effort, and then figure out what that effort means in terms of your other obligations to the university.
Right, except for summer salary, that's,
If you're on a 9 or 10-month appointment.
yeah, yeah.
If you're on a 12-month appointment like me,
Yeah. Same.
right?
Okay, I think I'm gonna stop the recording here and then we can just kind of open it up for questions if anyone has those.